Today we're going to talk about the Aurelia Router. The Aurelia Router is important because in a single page application, you have to give it the feel of a multi-page application so that users can, for example, navigate to an about page, or maybe they can navigate to your home page, or maybe they can go to posts / this is a post slug, or something like that. Basically, the idea is that a router will hook into your browser's web history API and be able to use the back and forward buttons, and users can basically interact with your application like a web page that they're used to, and that's pretty important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Sublime Text and go back into this new application that I have here. I am going to open up the app.html and app.js component. And first things first is I'm going to say that in this h1, in this header, I'm going to say this is my main app. So the idea here is that our app component is going to always be present, and then within the app component we are going to have different components that are kind of injected into there that give the feel of navigating around a multi-page application. The way we can do this is within the view of our app component, include a router view element. And whenever we have that router view element, what we need to do is in our view model, we need to use a configure router method, which takes a config parameter and a router parameter. We can configure the title of our router, and for now we will just call this router test. And what that'll do is this title will be used to populate the title of our application in our HTML document. So it'll appear in the bar up here, it'll appear in searches and whatnot, so that's pretty important. Additionally, we need to use the map method on configure, and what we would do here is pass an array of routes, and each of these routes is going to be an object with information about each of the routes, but we don't really have any routes yet, so I'll kind of leave it like this for now and tell you that to create a route, what we need is, well, a component for each route that's going to ultimately be injected into this router view element. So we can think that maybe our home page would use a component called index. So let's create that real quick. So in our source folder, let's create a new file called index.js. That'll be our view model. And then we'll also create a file called index.html, and that'll be our view. And index.js, we can say export class index. And in our HTML, we can say template. And maybe we'll just have a paragraph here that says this is our home page. So that seems like a good start to me. And so back in our configure router method in our app class, we can just say our first route is going to be users will navigate to an empty page. So this will be what users see by default. We will say the name of this route is home. And why this is important is that when we're generating links and whatnot in the future, we can just reference this name and it'll basically create the route at the appropriate URL, which will be really handy, especially if we want to modify our routes in the future. You don't have to go around replacing static text everywhere. The router will go ahead and figure that out for you. Next, we need to provide a module ID. This is really important. The module ID basically maps to the component that we want to show. In our case, we just created the index component, so our module ID needs to be index. And then finally, there's a title. There's a title property, and we can just call this home. And what this will do is when we go to this route, it will combine home and router test and make a nice friendly title for the page that will come out something like home, and then a pipe, and then router test. and that'll look great. And so whenever we go to one of these routes, maybe we'll have an about route later, and it'll be about router tests. So yeah, that'll look pretty nice. So great. So we have configured our first route. Users will just navigate to our base URL, and the index component will be injected into our router view, and that'll display home in the title of the HTML document. So what we can do is go to our console now, and let's go ahead and just do Aurelia run, or excuse me, AU run, and we'll do the watch flag so that we don't have to keep watching changes or keep running this every time we have a change in the future. And let's go to our browser. And great, so we have gone to our page. We see this is my main app, which came in our app.html view. But now we see this is our home page, and if you recall, that was in our index component. So this is working, and you can see the title of the document up here, home, and then the pipe and router test. So yeah, this seems like it's all coming together nicely, which is great. So I say we make an About Us page to start illustrating really how this works. So we can do this. As we know, when we did the index page, we decided to create this index component. So maybe we can just go ahead and create a couple new files and say about.html and about.js, and this will be our about component, and we'll export class about in the view model. And in the view, we can say template, and this, let's do a paragraph. This is our about page. Great, so we've created that component. And so we can just kind of copy this route configuration and say that, well, now when users navigate to our root, our base URL /about, we want them to go to the about page. And this name, again, is used as an identifier in our app. But the module index is what specifies, sorry, the module ID is what specifies which component it will be injected into our router view. In this case, it'll be the about component. Finally, maybe we want our title to say about us, and that should be sufficient. So now if we've configured this correctly, we can now go back to our application in the browser. We can see that this is our home page, and now we'll navigate to the about page. And something you may not be familiar with is that actually in this case we do localhost 9000 / then we do the hash, and then we do about. And I'll explain that in a little bit, why we need that hash, but just take my word right now that we need it. So if I go there, we see, yes, now this is our about page. Awesome. And I can use the back button, and we are back at our home page. I can use the forward button, and this is actually the router integrating with the web history API of your browser, which seems pretty fancy. It really doesn't matter to us. All we know is that it feels like it's working like a web page with multiple pages, and that's great. So that's awesome. What if though we don't want our users to be typing in the URLs all the time? We probably want some links. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our app view, and perhaps we'll do a menu. Generally speaking, if you're using styling, you would use an unordered list and list items. This is going to be pretty ugly, but honestly, I don't really care for this demo. It's really to just show that we can indeed create dynamic links here. So what we'll do is create an unordered list with a couple list items, one for each of our routes. So we know that we'll probably have a home link, and we'll probably have an about link. And so, yeah, we could do something like, empty and something like /about, or maybe we would need to do, something like that. I don't know. But as I had mentioned, if you then wanted to change the route in our configuration. This could get kind of messy because then you have to find out everywhere you've specified this link. So we definitely don't want to do it that way. But what we can do is we can actually use this route href property, which Aurelia will smartly go in and say, all right, let's populate the link for whichever route is named home. And if we go back into our config, we can see this first route is named home. So it will populate the link accordingly here. And again, for our second item for about, we can say about. And again, it will say, oh, okay, we have a route that's named about, so let's populate that URL as specified in our config. So if I've saved that, I'm going to go back to the browser now and see, okay, great, I have two links. If I hover over them, they are exactly as I would expect. So now I can click on home and I get to the home page. I click on about, and here we are at the about page. So that's really awesome. And you know, now we're starting to feel pretty good about our routing. But I mentioned before, maybe we would have posts slash this is your slug or something like that. But this would be a variable. This could change over time. You know, if you created a new post, you'd want it to switch up. You don't want to hard code the URL here. And fortunately, Aurelia is also great at handling that situation. So what we'll do is we will create a new route. And so let's say we are doing some sort of blog, and I can create a post component. So I'll just go ahead and create a new post view model and save that as post.js. And I will create a new post view. I'll save that as post.html. Within the HTML, I'll go ahead and just, sorry, I shouldn't have done the full HTML. I'll do a template. Great. And perhaps we'll do an h2 tag, and we'll say that, well, post title. We'll do that for now. And we'll fill out that post title in a second. And in the view model, we need to do export class post. Awesome. So within our app view model with the router configuration, we can now go ahead and configure a new route. Let's call this post. And in the name, we'll call it post. The module ID, again, post. And the title, we'll just say this is, okay, view post. Awesome. So we had mentioned, though, that perhaps we would want to say my slug here in our route definition. So what we can do is just do :slug, and this becomes a parameter that is passed through the URL, which is pretty cool. We can configure that pretty quickly. And so within our post view model, what we can do is we can use the activate lifecycle hook to access any parameters that are passed, and we can say this dot slug equals params.slug. So now any parameter that's passed through the URL, in this case we're passing as specified, we are passing slug. So I can now access params.slug and set this .slug equal to it. And since we have our two-way binding, I can now access this .slug from our view. So if I go into our post view, I will say slug. Awesome. So now I'm just going to go ahead, and we haven't created a link to it explicitly, but now since I've created my component and since I've configured my route, I can now use the URL bar to navigate to this URL. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to just go to, I think we called it post. So I'm going to go to localhost 9000 post. This is your slug. Let's go there. And great. So now it accesses this is your slug. We can see the title says view post, and that's exactly what we wanted to happen. So this is now totally dynamic. We can call it Aurelia tutorial we can call it how to use the Aurelia router. You know, we can basically do whatever we want. And how you can imagine this would actually work in a real life situation is that within our post view model, we would pull in this slug from the URL, and then we would do an API call to our backend, and we would pull in the associated post with that slug, and we would then populate our view accordingly. So this is getting you part of the way there, which is awesome. So one more thing I wanted to show here is that we can also create links to routes that take parameters. And so if for some reason on my main app view I wanted a specific link to a post, we can also use this route-href, this route.href property, but we have to be a little more explicit here. So perhaps this will link to the Aurelia Router post, or the Aurelia Router tutorial post. But since we are going to be specifying both route and parameters, we need to explicitly say, okay, the route is post, but also we want to bind parameters here. And what we're going to bind is the slug being the Aurelia Router tutorial. Let me just go ahead and check to make sure that looks good. Yeah, perfect. So let's talk through that again. So in these other list items, I didn't have to specifically say the route was home or the route was about. It just kind of assumes if you're just passing a single string here, then yeah, you're talking about the name of that route, no problem. But since I'm now passing parameters in this last one, I have to do route href. I have to specifically say that the route is named post and that I'm binding some parameters to this route. Specifically, I'm saying the slug will be equal to Aurelia Router tutorial. So let's open up our browser and click on that. And sure enough, here we are, Aurelia Router tutorial. I can go back and create another one, and we will go ahead and just call that something else. Maybe this new one will be called Advanced Aurelia, and Advanced Aurelia post. Let's go back into our browser, and now we are seeing the Advanced Aurelia post. So you now know quite a bit about at least the basics of the Aurelia router, but you know, this is all really important to creating a compelling front-end application. So the one other thing I wanted to tell you was I had mentioned this hash, and then now I've been kind of glossing over it for the rest of the tutorial, but I just want to explain that there's nothing super magical going on with this router. And if you have done regular, or I guess just if you're used to creating HTML pages in general, then you might be used to, if you have just within your HTML, you might be used to saying like a name equals the about section or something. And then you could, at some other point, you could link to that by saying go to about. Well, so this is actually kind of just what we're doing. We are using this a name attribute, but in the sense of our single page application, this index.html file. So what this really is doing is this is equivalent to index.html. And then this is just the hash that's being passed through. So really we're staying in this index.html page, and our router is just changing this hash parameter. And you can just test it out by going here and navigating around, and you can see that, oh, you know, it's just an HTML page and we're changing the hash parameter. Nothing super magical going on here, but you know, by taking this by taking the explicit specification of index.html out, we kind of make it look a little bit more compelling. So I think that's everything I wanted to go over on at least the basics of the Aurelia router. Play around with a little bit and join me for the next tutorial, which I will get to soon. Thanks so much, and please subscribe and check me out on AureliaCast.com. Thanks so much, guys.